It is Tuesday, October 12th. Speaking is Professor Ed Kalina of the UCF History Department. We're in the office of Major Charles Hite in Orlando, Florida, to interview Major Hite for the UCF Veterans History Project. Major Hite was born on March 23rd, 1947 in Centralia, Illinois. He served in the United States Air Force from May 9th, 1972 to May 31st, 1992. So we'll start by asking Major Hite about his family, about his parents, his siblings, and so forth.
Well, again, I was born in Centralia, but we moved down here when I was about 2 years old in Florida. Cutler Ridge area, down by Homestead area. And that's where I grew up. And went to school down there, Monte Palmetto. Went to USF over in Tampa, University of South Florida. And the reason I actually joined the service was Uncle Sam was giving me a choice of walking across Vietnam or flying over it. And I thought flying over Vietnam sounded like a lot better proposition than walking across it. And looking back on it, it was good. I enjoyed the Air Force the whole time. Had got 3 sisters. One is still alive. I was the first in my family actually to go into service. Again, I went in because, to tell you the truth, I much rather fly than walk at the time.
Can you tell me a little bit about your parents?
Both they're middle class. I grew up, I guess you'd call middle class, maybe low middle class to middle class. My father owned some grocery stores. My mother worked in, actually she imported and exported tropical fish. And so they're both still alive. They live up in actually north of Gainesville right now, a little place called Grandin, which is basically a stoplight on Highway 100. So they were, I don't want to say they were unhappy I joined. I'm not sure they were really either way, but like I said, I was the first one of my family really to go into service.
So you decided to enlist because of the draft situation
Correct.
That existed in 19...
If I had just waited probably a little longer, because they came out with the draft numbers.
Right.
My number was 310. But I was dating my wife then at the time, and I was looking at it and everything, so I'm like, well, what am I going to do when I graduate? And like I said, the Uncle Sam was sort of hot and heavy to say, well, you've been here in school quite a while. I think it's time for you to either graduate or join us. And like I said, my wife's an ex-Army brat. Her father was served 26 years as an enlisted medic. So she wasn't against joining the military, and so that's the reason I joined. I mean, she liked it. I thought it would be interesting. It'd give me something. I thought I was going to stay in for maybe 6 years, one tour, and then go on to do something else. But it was a great way of life. I saw a lot of the world. Of course, she got to stay home and take care of the children because the Air Force sent me around. But I can't complain about the service at all.
What do you remember about basic training? Where did you do basic training? What do you remember about leaving for basic training?
Basic training at the time for officers at Lackland Air Force Base. It's called Medina. It was a little annex down at Lackland in Texas. Interesting. There was about 15 of us on the plane going there. 3 of us were going to officer training. The rest were going enlisted. And we get on board the plane, and the sergeant we get on the plane one guy was sort of gung-ho. He said, who wants to be in charge? And he said, I'll be in charge. I'll take all the records and everything. So the other guy said, okay, fine. You can do that, because we're just going on this plane. We get at Lackland. We land there at San Antonio. We're walking around the airport, like typical civilian people, till this voice yelled out, get in line over there on those lines. No talking, no joking, no smoking, and when I want you to breathe, I'll tell you to breathe. When I say jump, I want you all to run on that bus and sit in those seats, and there'll be no talking. No nothing, just sit there. And I'm thinking, what the heck have I done? And that was my whole thought on all the way to the base out at Lackland. I'm going, holy smokes, did I really do the right thing? We get at Lackland, this other sergeant jumps on board, shouts at everyone, says, listen, when I tell you to get out of your seats, I want you to get out of your seats, run in that building, stand in that line, and don't move till I get in there. And is there anybody here going to officer training? 3 of us raise our hands and says, will you gentlemen please wait over there for a second? There'll be a bus along for you. So I thought maybe enlisting, going as an officer had to be better going in as enlisted. That was my first taste of that. And we get to our side, and the guy says, you know, your class won't start for 2 days. Go get your rooms. You know, I'll give you your rooms, and come on down. We'll take you out to get something to eat. And that's when it showed me there was a little bit of difference right then. Basic training. Basic training was, I was in what they call 90-day wonders, I guess. That's about how long officer training lasted. And, you know, we got through with that, and I got my brand new second lieutenant bars on, and we're getting on board a plane to go back to Tampa at the time, where I was going to get married. And all these other guys are on board, captains, majors, and they were doctors and veterinarians, who had gone down there for 2 weeks to learn how to put uniforms on. But because they were doctors and vets, they were coming in as majors and captains. I thought it was somebody until I got on board that plane. All right. And,
So how long were you in at Lackland?
Probably right around 90 days. It was about a 3-month tour. And left there went to, I graduated there 4 August. Got to Tampa and got married 12 August. And then went directly from there to a short 5-day trip across the country for a honeymoon to Mather Air Force Base, where undergraduate nav training was at.
Were you assigned to be a navigator? Did you choose to be a navigator? How did that work? That was your specialization, correct?
When I went in, we all went in as pilots. Or there was about 6 of us that were going in as pilots. We got to OTS, Officer Training School, and they said, okay, all there's going to be pilots, take a step forward. So about half the class took a step forward, and there was not so fast. We don't need as many pilots as we thought we needed. Here's the list of those who are going to be the pilots. And it was sort of strange. The 3 guys in my class who were going to be pilots all had relatives who were in the Air Force. All had they were colonels and generals' sons. But they said, they actually asked us, do you want to be rated or non-rated? We're new. We're going, well, what's the difference between being rated and non-rated? He said, well, rated flies. I said, well, okay. So they went down the line and rated, want to be rated, want to be rated. So that's how I became a navigator. It was, I can't complain because I went into B-52s. Being a navigator in SAC is different than being a navigator probably in TAC at the time or whatever. Navigators and bombardiers in SAC are a little different breed than your navigators and your fighters and your transports. We were a little more, probably more important part of the crew, because in our job was to go to war, where the navigators told the pilots where to go, and on bomb runs, the radar navigator took over for the bomb runs because that was our function. So we used to laugh that the pilots flew us to work.
So from the outset, you were going into the Strategic Air Command. How did that work? How did it become decided you would do that as opposed to
going into being what we call 130 trash hauler,
right,
or being a guy in the backseat of a fighter? You get to nav training and you go through your nav training, and at the end of nav training, SAC came in at that time and said, these are the people I'm going to take. And I was one of the people SAC said they wanted. And they said, I'm going to take these to be navigators. Okay, you guys, I'm going to take you to be EVO officers. And okay, everybody else, the first 10 people in their class got to choose. I was 15. So SAC came in and said, okay, I want this group. And after that, everybody else, then TAC came in and said, there are so many assignments to 130s, fighters, whatever. After the first 10 picks, SAC said, okay, everybody, you're mine. Then everybody else in the class got to then, by class rank, pick an airplane. We stayed, if you're going to be a SAC crew member, you stayed at Mather because that's where your advanced training was done at. Nav bomb training, or the EVO officers went into their EVO school, electronic vertical officers went into their school. So that's how I ended up at SAC. I actually wanted there was a C-130 to CCK in Taiwan, which I thought at the time would be a pretty neat little, be a trash hauler, fly around to different places, but SAC, I can't complain. Like I said, Strategic Air Command at the time was where if you were going to be a navigator, it was basically the place to be.
How long did the advanced training
It lasted about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, like everybody starts out as navigators. They came through and said, okay, based upon your testing and everything, you're going to be a radar navigator. So this second half of the class, you're going to go through the nav seat, the radar navigator seat. You'll have a guy going through as your nav. Because it's, a B-52 has two guys upstairs, the pilots, and you got your EW gunner facing backwards in a G model, and then the navigator sent downstairs. And again, your navigator got you there, the bombardier did the bomb running, but he was in charge of making sure the navigator did everything right. So that lasted about, like I said, about a year there in nav training. Then you go to Mather.
Where was that located?
Well, you leave Mather and go down to Castle Air Force Base, where the actual flying unit's at.
Where was Mather?
Mather's in Sacramento, California. Then you go down to Castle, which was down in Merced, California,
Mm-hmm.
where you actually did your air flying. At Mather was just all simulators.
Mm-hmm.
So you go down there and fly down there for, I don't know, we were probably there about, I don't really remember how long we were down there. We were down there long enough to we flew F models there, did your qualifying there. Because I was a baby nav, I actually had a check ride in the F model. A lot of guys didn't get their check ride till they got to the main wing, so I took an F model check ride. Then I was assigned to Blytheville, Arkansas. If anybody who's in SAC knows it, it's called Hooterville, because it was in the middle of god-awful nowhere, where most SAC bases are in the middle of nowhere, because nobody really wants to nuke weapons around their houses. But Blytheville was in the Delta region, and got there as a baby nav team that broke us up, and took another check ride, because the G model is different than the F model. Equipment rise, so you had to do that again, and took a check ride, and then one week later, I was on alert.
And where was that? Still in Arkansas?
That's at Blytheville. I was at Blytheville for about 5 to 6 years at Blytheville. Came there as a second lieutenant radar navigator, left there as the SO1 radar navigator, the chief of standard bow radar.
And through your entire career, was the B-52 the only plane that?
Once we laughed that that's tattooed on you somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't really know where they tattooed you, but if you're in B-52s, you never left B-52s. It was a career. You were in SAC and you stayed in SAC. I guess because they spent so much money training you in the planes and everything that SAC pretty well kept you.
How much difference was there among the various models?
The D model had optics. The F model had optics. You actually could look out. The G model was the first one with a full radar with a 10-inch scope in front of you for your radars. The H model For downstairs, there wasn't a whole lot of difference. The difference was in the engines, and the G model had wet thrusters to take off. The H model had fans, turbo fans. The gunner sat in the tail, and the D model and every other model, except the F, he was up front. The G and H, and she sat up front with you. The EW gear's a little different between the two planes.
Did you like one model better than the other?
Well, I flew G models almost my whole time, except for in Utah where it was D models, and then when I went to First Combat Evaluation Group, that's where I started flying H models.
Did pilots like one better than the other?
It's like everything else. If that's what you grew up on, that's your home. You felt comfortable in that plane. The H models had a little more power in them. They were the newer planes. The pilots liked them because they actually had a bunk in them upstairs. We never got to see it, but the NAVs, the EWs and gunners sometimes laid out in actually had a little bed there that they could actually lay down in. We sort of, on the long flights, we'd sort of lay between our seats. If you're flying for 15 hours, you just sort of lay between the seats. Get out of it if you could.
So you were through your training and actually on active duty then by sometime in later 1973, early 1974?
I got to Blytheville in 1974, I believe,
Okay.
early part of 74.
Okay.
Immediately then turned out, sent to Utah.
Mm-hmm. And then what was your routine like in Blytheville?
Well, Blytheville was as a second lieutenant, you don't realize how poor you are. But Blytheville, there was nothing there. There was nowhere to spend your money. My wife taught school, which helped out. But like I said, Blytheville was called Hooterville for a reason. It was 50 miles to Memphis, and that was your town. It was 45 miles to a little place called Jonesboro, Arkansas, which had University of Arkansas State there. But that was it. But it was, you're young. The whole, the thing revolved around the O Club for you most of the time. That was where you partied and activities at. You'd go on alert for 7 days at a time, then they'd give you 2.5 days off. 3.5 days off. And during that off time, northern Arkansas is beautiful. Up in the northeast, around all the lakes. So, my wife and I, we bought a boat, and we'd go boating with, you went on alert as a crew, you went on leave as a crew. That crew was your family. There were 5 other than you, and you lived with them. That was your crew. You couldn't take leave when you wanted to take leave. You took leave when the crew was given leave. And the crew was given leave based upon the needs of the squadron. What the squadron needed. When would they think you could take leave? So you lived with that group. That's who you partied with and everything. It was a small base, but it was good in the fact that it was a family atmosphere, because that was it. Blytheville had one main street down the middle of it, and it had a combination grocery store, clothing store. It did have a clothing store, and it had a furniture store, which everybody bought their furniture at.
When you were on alert, did that mean you just sat and waited, or were you flying
No.
training missions, or what was involved?
When you
with
were
that?
on alert, that's when you did most of your training. You go to take your simulators, your EWO simulators, your emergency warrior simulators, and basically you sat out there waiting for the klaxon to go off for you to run your airplane and take off for war. You would get practice klaxons. You didn't know when they were happening. Nobody really knew when they happened. When the horn went off, no matter where you were on a base, you had alert trucks with lights on them, and you would go across the flat line, and you had to report to your plane within SAC wanted an immediate reaction time of a certain amount of time. So, you know, you get to the plane and you report into the command post, everybody's on alert. And when you really don't know whether it's a practice or not. I mean,
When did you find that out?
well, you assume, because there was nothing really major going on. I mean, there was no crisis in the world going on at the time. So you made that assumption this was a practice, but you never knew. And you wouldn't really find out until you got to the plane, and you actually had to decode a message. And you decode the message based upon a ticket that you'd crack open, and that would give you what the code would be and everything, and you decode that as either, you know, this is a practice message, or it would be, every now and then you'd get a taxi message, and you'd have to taxi the bus up and down the runway. And it's, the first time you're on alert, sort of scary, because people on alert have sort of you have a macabre sense of humor, because you know what you're there to do. And you know if you do it, there's nothing to come home to, because you're a target, your base that you're leaving from is going to be gone, your family's going to be gone. So the sense of humor is sort of, people, I think other people probably think strange, but you know, on alert, it's one of those things that you did. That's how you compensated for realizing what you were going to be doing if you were called to do it.
Were these planes armed with live nuclear weapons, or?
Oh, on alert, you had at least 4 nuke weapons in each bomb bay minimum. Some planes had 4, and then you'd carry 6 SRAM, short-range attack missiles with 3 tips on them. Again, but our macabre sense of humor, we had one plane we loaded called the Crowd Pleaser. It only had 2 bombs in the bomb bay, but they were huge. And we called them crowd pleasers because we figured you didn't have to hit close to your target with them, because it was so big it was going to take everything out or anywhere around it. Again, like I said, the sense of humor of crowd pleasers, some, you know, probably peaceniks, peace people wouldn't really think that was very humorous. But on alert you did. Because you only had to go to 2 targets, so you said, you know, half the chance of getting shot down or something. Although you had what they call reconstitution bases if you did your sortie. Everyone sort of laughed at those because no one figured the planes were going to get that far. We figured that, you know, if we get through the first couple targets without getting shot down, you know, that'd been probably a plus. You have to figure that we're flying a B-52. The nukes, the missiles have already struck. So you've got some upset people already. And now we're going to come in about 8 hours or 6 hours behind the missiles. And if anybody's still there, they're going to be looking for you because they know when we're going to be coming through. And so you sort of figured it was even though they said it was a round trip, no one really thought of the sortie being a round trip sortie. Of course, again, what do you have to come home to? It was sort of.
Okay, so the next place you went was Utapao in Thailand. Under what circumstances did you deploy there?
Because I was a G model person, they came and said, okay, we need to send another crew to Utapao. And my pilot at the time was named Dan Kinneberg, was an old D model pilot. And they looked around and said, this guy is a D model pilot, we're going to send him with the crew. And if they're sending him, the rest of us went with it. So we had to go to Carswell and get our D difference training. And then we took a plane from Carswell Air Force Base in Texas to Guam, where you spent a day in Guam, then we went on over to Utapao and spent on a 90-day tour of Utapao. 89 days, because 90 days was considered a PCS, so they'd only send you TDY. So that's just 89 days.
And what did you do there?
Basically, we went up and did a lot of, this was at the very end of the war.
We're talking about 1975 now?
1975, there wasn't a lot of sorties going north or over Vietnam at all. We flew across Vietnam to get to Utapao, which was another of those little stories that is funny now, but our UO was sitting back there, fat, dumb, and happy, and all of a sudden these signals came up on him and said, you know, we've got a SRAM, we've got a missile lock on, which we're just going, what? And because they weren't supposed to have any missiles that far south where we were flying across, so we're not sure.
You're talking about the North Vietnamese?
Yeah, North Vietnamese. We weren't sure what he was getting, but it scared the bejesus out of us, to say the least, because we were just flying fat, dumb, and happy, just going, you know, we're just flying across country, and he got our attention rather rapidly, and he started up his little magic back there, and we landed Utapao safe and sound. Funny now, but at the time a little gut check. And once we got to Utapao, a lot of the bombing over the North Vietnam was done what they call a sky spot. And actually a ground radar directed you to a point, and they would tell you when to release your weapons. So we were working with them quite a bit, keeping them proficient, making sure they'd stay proficient, so in case we started bombing again, they'd be able to drop us where they wanted us to drop us. And we were there, like I said, when Cambodia fell and Phnom Penh went down, which was, we were just sitting there at the airfield, and in fact, my pilot was the supervisor of flying, and he said, you know, he came by and said, real quick, guys, you got to come out here. Said, Phnom Penh fell, and planes are just landing at the runway, both ways at Utapao. Utapao is a Royal Thai Navy base, but B-52s, that's where we flew out of. So it's got a 12,000-foot runway, but planes were landing both ways on it. And he says we sat there and watched them land, and it was just plane after plane that made it. A lot of them were crashing on the way because they didn't have enough fuel. They took off without enough fuel to make it all the way, but they didn't know that at the time, but they were trying to get out of Phnom Penh.
Okay, so these are Cambodian.
These are Cambodians trying to escape.
Escape from the Khmer Rouge.
From the Khmer Rouge, because they knew what was going to happen to them and their families. So these guys are actually trying to fly them and their families out in these planes. And
now, is this before South Vietnam falls?
I think South Vietnam
Before,
either had fallen or was right there at the time.
Yeah, but it's about the same time.
Because we were loading, they brought us in and were loading weapons on our planes to go bomb Phnom Penh at the time when it fell. They said, we're going to go bomb. So, you know, we got all our mission plans. We're sitting there waiting for a takeoff. And about that time, they canceled the sortie. Said we're not going to do it. It's too late to try to protect it. We'll just be bombing the city, and there's innocents in the city. But I was telling you earlier, planes were landing, and there'd be 15 people getting off a fighter, off the A1E SPAD, they called it. It looked like an airliner, because this guy got his wife, his kids, his grandparents. I mean, everybody was out. And like I said, those were the ones that made it to us. If you've probably seen pictures of people when Vietnam fell, you know, they're flying out with helicopters flying out there. But I don't think there were no helicopters could make it as far as us, and none that I know of that the Cambodians had. So they were just flying these little T-37s, or they call Dragonflies, A-37s. There are trainers, but we've made fighters out of them. But they didn't quite have the range to make it all the way. So they were the ones you could hear sort of bailing out and asking for help when they bailed out.
Where did you go after Utapao?
Well, Utapao back to Blytheville. And went back to Blytheville and progressed, like I said, from just a line crew radar navigator up to the standardization crews to become SO1. In SAC, you have what they call the First Combat Evaluation. They go around and evaluate all the other wings. made sure that the crews were flying correctly, doing everything correctly. And they came into Blytheville and evaluated us. And when they got through evaluating us, they asked me if I wanted to join them, go become part of them, which in SAC was a big step up from being just a wing radar navigator to being the evaluators. So, I said, sure. It was time to leave Blytheville anyway, because I'd been there a while, because I'd had orders for Minot, North Dakota. And Minot, North Dakota, or Blytheville, or Bartsdale, Louisiana. Somehow Bartsdale, Louisiana sounded a lot warmer to me than Minot, North Dakota. So I said, sure, I'd love to go to CVG. So they got me my order switched to go down to the Combat Evaluation Group, where we were there for 4 years, 4 or 5 years, which was good. It was an outstanding job. When I wasn't flying somewhere, I could be home. If we weren't out on evaluation, you came into the office, did a little office work, and if you didn't have anything to do, you went on home. And actually got to see my daughters down there grow up.
So you didn't have this pattern of alerts?
There were no, the alerts were gone. The only thing you had to do was, we'd go out, bomb, there were something like 15 bomb wins at the time. We had to evaluate each one about once every 2 years on the flying schedule. So we did about 7, 8 a year. We'd go out for 2 weeks at a time. We did other things too, but I mean that was a major job. We were also considered the command's subject matter experts whenever there was a B-52 crash or weapon simulations. If you had to do something with weapons, we went out on conferences like that to say, okay, we put Harpoon missiles on B-52s for sea surveillance. Well, that had never been done before, so we were tasked to be part of the crews to do that. So I was, because I was a weapons officer in CBG at the time, I got to go to I put Harpoon missiles on B-52s for sea surveillance. We could carry 6 of them, which was quite a bit at the time. That's more than some of the ships carried at the time. So so we did other things, but I actually got to be home more often.
And how long did you do that?
We were there from 1980 to 84, I think, 84, 85. Because then left there to go to Offutt, Nebraska, where SAC headquarters at the Department of, I went to the Directorate of Training, DOT, up there for air crews. And of the 20 years in the service, I must admit the 2 years in Omaha, Nebraska had to be the worst. Not a big fan of Nebraska. And it's too far from Florida for one thing. The wind blew constantly. I'm a southern boy. This snow stuff was just a little too much for me. It's freezing. Because we laughed that the wind blew from North Dakota, nothing to stop it when it got to Omaha, Nebraska. And there wasn't anything. So.
And that was SAC headquarters.
That was
right?
SAC headquarters. Worked down in the bunkers.
Was that good or bad, aside from the Nebraska weather? Being at headquarters?
Being at headquarters, I believe that if most aircrew members are given the choice between staying in a wing and flying and going to headquarters, you'd find the headquarters empty. I mean, there are very few people I know of wanted to go to SAC headquarters. It was one of those things, one of those little blocks you had to fill and check mark. I was at SAC headquarters, check. So went there for 2 years. Got asked to go to the B-1Bs, and I turned it down because I just didn't think I wanted to go to the B-1B. It's a brand new airplane at the time. And the SINCSAC asked me why I turned it down. We gave briefings. Part of our crew training was briefing SINCSAC on the B-1. And the B-1A was a super airplane. It got canceled. Reagan brought back the B-1B, which was looked the same, but internally it was a different airplane. It had some problems that I don't know whether they're corrected still yet on them. And we were working on those problems, and I don't know how he found out I turned it down, but he asked me at one of the briefings, and I said, well, sir, it's got some problems that I don't. And he had been briefed, of course, that there were no problems with the B-1B. It's a super plane. So I made a mistake of telling him what a couple of the problems were that hadn't been fixed on it. And after the briefing, the SAC DO, the 2-star, called me into his office and said, Butch, that was something he needed to hear. But where do you want to go now? And I said, well, you've got 7th Air Division over in Germany. I'd certainly love to go to Germany. He said, okay, 7th Air Division is where you're going. Because basically you're through here at SAC headquarters. So got to go to Germany,
Okay.
Which 7th Air Division.
Now this is the early 80s we're talking about?
This was probably 85, 86 in that time frame. And my wife's mother's German.
Mm-hmm.
So, and her father was stationed, that's where they met, he was stationed in Germany, so she actually had relatives over there in Germany. And the air division there was maybe 40 of us, and our job was we took care of all tankers and bombers in the European theater.
They didn't have any B-52s there, did they?
We didn't have, but we flew exercises in
Okay.
there. We had lots of tankers at Mildenhall and Lakenheath. Excuse me, just Mildenhall tankers stood there, so we had a tanker wing there. But of course, nobody really wants B-52s on their country other than us. So we were in charge of all exercise training and everything like that. And it was a small outfit, like I said, 40 of us. We had that 1-star who understood that when you're not working, you should be playing over there, because you never get a chance to go to Europe for free. So his idea was if you could get back to the base in 24 hours, you could go VOCA, voice order to commander. You didn't have to take leave. So there's nowhere in Europe you could get back in 24 hours. I mean, the Autobahns in Germany were just, I mean, you could get anywhere we'd get from where we were at to Switzerland in about 3 hours, 3.5 hours to Switzerland. Across Switzerland into northern Italy. I mean, it was just, it was great that my family got to go places versus just me being sent places. We actually got to go together. We bought a little Beamer over there so I could drive like the Germans did on the Autobahn. So we enjoyed Germany. We got to see her relatives. My family got to go places I didn't actually get to go because my wife was teaching there in the Dodge system. And during the winter, the Dodge school would close down for a week and take all the students down skiing down to Austria. I mean, so for a week, they'd go to Austria skiing. They went to D-Day. During D-Day, they were there in France. And they got to see everything over there in France during D-Day. And they actually had French people come up to them and tell them thank you, because you're Americans, yeah. They said, well, thank you very much for what you did. So they got to see, my children, I'm so glad, were military brats. I think it helped them adjust to different places, because moving around, some people stay in the same school all their whole life. They had to adjust, and I think it helped them when they went to college. And, actually, they're both working right now, of course, so I think it helped them in that.
Going back a little bit, what actually was involved in being a navigator in a B-52? It was mostly electronic?
Well, the navigator had to, B-52s flew low level.
Mhm.
I mean, that was our Evo sortie, was you would fly 400 feet, 300 feet off the deck. And the navigator's job was to get you, of course, from point A to point B. The radar navigator had a 10-inch scope, and the navigator only had a 5-inch. So the radar's job was to update these counters that the navigator used to figure out where they were at. And he uses little 5-inch scopes up too, but his whole job was basically to, he looked in the scope, checked the counters, made sure they were correct, and his job was to get to A and B. Once you got to what we call the IP, the initiation point, the radar navigator took over and did the bomb run. The old, when I first came in, the G models, you had 2 offsets. The navigator would have to, after you were on one offset, the navigator would change the other offset out so you get closer to the weapons and you drop off those offsets. So as it progressed, as it got more modernized, when the SRAM came in, the SRAM Short Range Attack Missile, it actually had an inertial unit in it. So you'd get those updated, and those would be your most accurate. And then right before I left, you were getting satellite GPS and stuff like that. I mean, the navigator's job really became so much easier when you had GPS. Because, I mean, this is where you're at. Versus this is where I think we're at. The job has really changed quite a bit from when I first joined. You had nothing, and you used to shoot celestial. The EW would take cell shots, and the navigator have to plot, figure out where they're at. I don't even think they even use cell anymore, because you got the satellites up there. So it's been a real difference in what the navigator does. He's more of a system operator now more than being a navigator, I believe. What I'm talking to.
Now, of course, Vietnam was such a traumatic experience for so many people. What was morale like in the post-Vietnam period, or was it different in the Air Force, in SAC?
The I think it was different in SAC because, you know, the wing I was in at Blytheville lost 3 planes, 3 G mods, which, you know, doesn't sound like a whole lot until you realize there's only 18 planes at the wing. So, I mean, you've lost, 3 out of 18. That's 1/6 of your crews and your planes lost. But because we were still pulling nuclear alert while they were going through Vietnam, I don't think it was as traumatic for SAC as it was for the Army. And I don't think for anybody in the Air Force, because, you know, in the Air Force, you're going to fly a sortie. You're going to come back and land at a safe base. You're going to take a shower. You're going to go to the O Club and get a drink. You're going to go to the NCO Club and get a drink. And you'll sit there and decompress. My hat's off to the Army. Those guys were out in the field 24/7, always something trying to kill them. Like the Air Force just, I mean, I'll be the first to admit we had it easier. I mean, we got friends, you know, I mean, you had that, out of Guam, they used to call it 12 hours of boredom followed by 5 minutes of sheer terror over the north. But then if you made it, you came back, landed, talked about it, you know, and you got to relax some. But the guys on the ground, the Army, my hat's off to them, the Marines. The Navy, I mean, the Navy's a bit like us too. The Navy, I think, even less. They didn't even go on shore very much. I mean, they sat out there with their boats and fired and things, except for the air crews, of course, that flew in. We used to laugh that, you know, the Air Force is the only service that sends all their officers off to war. I mean, enlisted guys wave to you, and if you make it back, they'll fix it. But I don't think morale, at least in Blytheville where I was at, it wasn't that much a difference. You didn't really notice it because you went back to pulling alert and pulling EO sorties. You just didn't have those tours to Utapao and Thailand mixed in.
And because SAC was an elite type of unit, was there Any recruitment problems in the post-Vietnam period?
Again, SAC pretty well came in and said, these are the people I'm taking. They got, after the first 10 or so, like I said, SAC didn't have a problem because they were SAC, and they just came in and said, we want these people, we want these people handling our nuclear weapons. So these people are the ones we're taking. And nobody said no.
How long were you in Germany?
We were there till right after Desert Storm.
Okay.
When Desert Storm, at the end of Desert Storm, we came back from Incirlik. The 1-star at our wing called me and said, "Butch, I've got orders from Minot, North Dakota for you again." And he said, "You want to go to Minot, North Dakota?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, what would you like to do?" I said, "Well, at this time I had 18 years in." I said, "Well, I'm thinking about retiring. I would like to, I know we have a SAC unit at CENTCOM in MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa." I said, "I'd like to go back to Florida." He said, I had some good commanders. He says, you'll go back to Florida." So my last 2 years I spent down at CENTCOM in Florida. Went to school at USF. I'm back in Tampa, back in Florida. Took me 18 years to get back to Florida. We were happy. The job at Tampa was an interesting job. I was in charge of the Sinks EC-135s. CENTCOM, Commander CENTCOM, and Schwartz at the time, has 2 command and control airplanes. And they were kept up with Warner Robins. When we flew anywhere, we'd fly one down, we'd load it up, and we'd go over to Southwest Asia about every, it seemed like every 3 weeks we'd be taking a trip over there. And my job there was, I was in charge of the air crew of the planes once they got to MacDill. So every time those planes flew, I had to fly with them. So about every 3 weeks, I was over either to Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Oman, Kuwait, flying with General Schwarzkopf. We took his farewell tour together. I was on it. He was going on his final tour, going over there and getting all his gifts, which he didn't get to keep. But some of those gifts were beautiful, and other ones you're going, I wouldn't put that in my house. I mean, some of the gifts were just fantastic. The other ones you're going, no, don't think I'd want that. And then when he left, General Hoare, who was a Marine general, took over. Probably one of the nicest men I've ever worked for. I know why. I think if General Hoare had a bunch of sticks and he had to take a hill, the men would follow him. He had that sort of charisma of, like he cared for people. And our first sortie with him, we were coming back. We'd been over there about a week and a half, and we're coming back stateside, and I get called back to his little area of the plane, and he says, "I want you to line up the crew and maintenance crew when I get ready to leave." I'm thinking, what have we done? What have we done that's wrong? Because I think, you're thinking to yourself, you left that, you're going, that went all right, that went all right, that went all right. And we flew with a crew of, it's a tanker, basically, airplane. So we flew with a crew of 3 pilots, a navigator, a boom operator, and we flew with our own maintenance people. Flew with about 10 maintenance people to fix the plane, say something went wrong. So I went up and told the pilots, I said, "Listen, when we land, no one try to leave anywhere. General Hoare wants us to line up and talk to us." And they're doing the same thing I'm doing. They're going, "Oh, wait a minute, we didn't do anything wrong here, here, here." He just wanted to say thank you. He said, "I know you guys do things I'll never see you doing and everything to make sure this is okay. And I just want to say thank you in advance for everything I know you're going to do for me and to make sure it goes okay." And now that right off the bat, he was a hit with the air crew and everybody, because never heard really General Schwarzkopf was a different type guy.
What are your memories of Schwarzkopf?
Fiery. He could get mad in a heartbeat, but he cooled off quick. I mean, and he didn't like flying. He had his own seat, special seat, and I had to tell him when we were getting ready to take the runway, I'd say, "Getting ready to take the runway, sir." And when you take off, the flaps come up and makes a sound. He hated that sound. So, it's gears up, sir, and the flaps. You could see his hands, tense up during takeoff. Once he got airborne, he was okay. It was just the takeoffs and landings, which is the most dangerous part of the flight to begin with, but that's the part he didn't like. But once we got airborne and everything, he was fine. Like I said, though, he could fire off quickly and cool off just as quick. General Hoare, I only saw him get mad once, and he did it in he didn't scream, he didn't shout, but you didn't want to be the guy he was telling off. We had a major who wanted to go on a trip we were in Jordan at the time. He wanted to go out to, I'm trying to think of the name of that city out there that's built in the caves and everything, underground. And he wanted to go on that trip. So he told the command doctor, who flies with, who is also that there wasn't room for him because he wanted to go. Well, General Hoare found out about that, and he called him in, and in a calm tone, basically this guy could fit under the door when he got done with it. And it was just very calm and very, if you ever do something like that again, I'm afraid I'll have to rip you apart or shred you when I get done with you. Your next base will be a place like the Green Pine side in northern Canada, and you won't be a major, you'll just be there as a tech or something, I mean, very calm, but you knew when he got done, you're going, God, I don't want to ever have him. I'd much rather have Schwarzkopf scream at me.
Now, what was your duty at the time of Desert Storm?
At Desert Storm, we were the forward deployed for the bombers. We were flying bombers out of Maroon, Spain, which they would fly through the Med. I was flying the northern front. We also had bombers in the south, but we were doing the northern front. So we were flying out of Maroon, Spain, across the Med, through Turkey, and then down through this north. And we were actually the targeteers. SAC would come in and say, okay, how's these look? And we'd go, well, they look okay to us. But my job was to go to the Turkish general.
Now, where are you based again?
We were in Insular Turkey.
Okay.
My job,
which is roughly where?
It's Insular Turkey. It's about in the middle of Turkey.
Okay.
It's in the southwest sort of area of Turkey. We went there. My job was to go to the general and say, General, these are the targets we plan on hitting tonight. And he'd look at him and he'd go yes or no, or he'd say no, not that one, or he'd never add targets. He would just subtract. And once he did that, our job was to go back and mission plan the sortie through Turkey, because we had to, once they broke Turkey's quarter, we had to make sure they flew the correct routes and everything, into northern Iraq, and then out of there back home again, out of Turkish airspace. They're a proud people, Turks, and they want to know exactly what you're doing in their space. And I mean, if we had somebody who were flying the United States, we'd probably want to know exactly what they're doing also. Interesting job. It's we were in the target range of the missiles that Iraq would fire, and when they launched them, you never knew they were coming towards us or Israel. The first time we landed at night, and I and this other guy we were going to go see our duty location, see where we were going to be at. So we walked on down to the bunker where we were going to be stationed. And we're looking around in there, and we're talking to a couple of guys, and in the corner of the room was all this chem gear. And we were looking at all this chem gear, and all of a sudden the klaxon goes off. And they all start jumping in their chemical gear, warfare gear. Well, we didn't have any chemical warfare gear with us, because we had just walked off the plane to see where we're at. But you know, some of that chemical gear fit us. It was in the corner. And they said they did that every time the klaxon went off, because at first they didn't know whether they were going to be firing which direction, how crazy Saddam was going to be. But that was the job there. It was from there, like I said, I went to CENTCOM and retired out of CENTCOM, and serendipitously came over here to UCF.
So you kind of eased into retirement.
Yeah, it sort of. It was a good last 2 years, let's put it that way. That got to be back in Florida, got to figure out where we wanted to go, and a lot of people don't get to do that.
How did you come to come over here at UCF?
My wife's parents lived in Longwood. We were doing out processing at MacDill, and UCF had a program that came over there at the time and talked to the people out processing. My wife started talking to the person who was doing that. I started talking to her. She said, "Would you mind coming over to UCF and showing my boss what I do?" I said, "Sure, we'll come over and do that." And we did that. She said, "Well, have you ever thought about working at UCF?" I said, "I hadn't really thought about it. I was going to go here and get another master's degree." I said, "No, but sounds good to me." And like I said, it's just serendipitous that I've been working here ever since.
Well, thank you very much, Major Hite. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and most enjoyable to hear about your experiences in the United States Air Force.
It was a good 20 years. I can't complain at all. My family got to go places that most families don't get to go. Europe for free. They saw things they probably would never see. My daughter now knows what the Eiffel Tower looks like in person. We've been down to Naples. We've been to Rome. They've seen the world, which, like I said, a lot of people don't get to do.
Well, thank you again.
Well, thank you.